Our final reading for this morning comes from the book of Isaiah, as we have been doing each week during Advent. This section of Isaiah appears to be from a different prophet than the one we've heard in previous weeks, a prophet with a different setting, prophet of the exile in Babylon. Listen for what the Spirit may speak through these words. The wilderness and the dry land shall be glad. The desert shall rejoice and blossom. Like the crocus, it shall blossom abundantly and rejoice with joy and singing. The glory of Lebanon shall be given to it, the majesty of Carmel and Sharon. They shall see the glory of the Lord, the majesty of our God. Strengthen the weak hands and make firm the feeble knees. Say to those who are of a fearful heart, be strong, do not fear. Here is your God. He will come with vengeance, with terrible recompense. He will come and save you. Then the eyes of the blind shall be opened, and the ears of the deaf unstopped. The lame shall leap like a deer, and the tongue of the speechless sing for joy. For waters shall break forth in the wilderness and streams in the desert. The burning sand shall become a pool, and thirsty ground springs of water. The haunt of jackals shall become a swamp. The grass shall become reeds and rushes. A highway shall be there, and it shall be called the Holy Way. The unclean shall not travel on it, but it shall be for God's people. No traveler, not even fools, shall go astray. No lion shall be there, nor shall any ravenous beast come upon it. They shall not be found there, but the redeemed shall walk there. And the ransomed of the Lord shall return and come to Zion with singing. Everlasting joy shall be upon their heads. They shall obtain joy and gladness, and sorrow and sighing shall flee away. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. I don't know about you, but I have trouble watching the news these days. I catch the network news if I happen to be home in the evening. And I'm one of those dinosaurs that still goes out and picks up my newspaper out of the driveway every morning. And most days I turn and look at every page, but I don't read all the articles. It's just too depressing. I just can't read one more story about the latest shooting, or the terrible wildfires, or devastating hurricanes, and how they're going to become more common because of climate change. I don't think I can stomach much more about racial hatred going mainstream, or legislation being passed that benefits the rich at the cost of the poor. I see people on social media who react to such things with a visceral anger, and I can still get angry, but lately I'm more inclined to despair. I'm reasonably certain that there are plenty of other people struggling with the news these days. On social media over the past year, I've frequently seen people post a cartoon from the New Yorker's David Cyprus. Features a well-dressed couple walking on the street, the city sidewalk, and the woman says, "My desire to be well informed is currently at odds with my desire to stay sane. Now, I assume that the cartoon had been drawn for our current situation, but it turns out it's actually from the 1990s. And Cyprus says he can't even remember what events actually originally inspired it. He did republish it recently in an article he wrote for the New Yorker where he talked about how he was trying to stay sane these days. And a prominent strategy for him was the rationing of his news intake. Of course, there are plenty of other people for whom feelings of anger or despair are much more personal in nature. Those who are dealing with terrible disease or personal tragedy. Those who constantly have to navigate the institutional racism of our culture. Those who have experienced sexual harassment or assault and have felt there's nothing they can do for fear of losing a job and health care or their status and respectability. And a time when the news is filled with hopelessness and despair. A time when there just doesn't look good for the future is exactly the setting for the prophecy I just read. So too, Mary's Magnificat is spoken into a time when Israel is under the thumb of Roman power, a time when being poor or disabled or widowed or orphaned could be a death sentence, a time when hope for the future seemed grim. Now, as I said, the words from Isaiah seem to be from a different prophet than the one we heard in the previous 2 weeks. The scene has shifted from Jerusalem and the desire for a new and better king to Babylon and exile. Jerusalem has been destroyed. Solomon's magnificent temple no more. The people are now in a foreign land, in a foreign culture. No doubt many of them despaired, wondering if their God had abandoned them. Into this despair, the prophet speaks of a way in the wilderness where the ransomed of the Lord will return once more to Zion, to their home. It is an image reminiscent of Israel's foundational story, where she journeyed through the wilderness from slavery in Egypt to freedom, from despair to a land of milk and honey. The story of journey in the wilderness is a familiar one, but this journey is different. The barrenness of the wilderness in Exodus is replaced with blossoming and rejoicing, with springs gushing forth in the desert. And God will act to set things right. And every year in Advent, we hear these old stories, these old promises once again. Every year, people who despair and wonder if God is there, once again are reminded of a day that is coming when the spears will be turned into farm implements, when wolves will live with lambs when the desert shall bloom and rejoice, when a child shall be born who is called Prince of Peace. And every year, the attendance will grow and will swell on Christmas Eve even more. People show up because there's special music and familiar carols, because of nostalgia, because of the remembrance of Christmases long past. But I think people also come because we need these promises. We need to be reminded of these stories of hope. We need to remember that the exiles did go home from Babylon. We need to remember that a child was born who was Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God. We need to be reminded that God has acted in history in the past so that we can long for the day and work for the day when God will act decisively in the future. A day when weapons will be turned into implements of life. When the poor and the hungry will be lifted up, and life will burst forth from what had previously been barren and desolate. In the midst of all the frenzied, hectic activity that our consumer culture has foisted upon this season, I want to ask you to take a moment this week, and again following Christmas, to stop and to read and to savor some of these old stories. Sit with them in stillness. Hold them in your heart. Allow the images in them to come to life in your imaginations. Let them work on you, and remember that God has moved, has acted in the past, and will move and will act again. There's a portion of today's prophecy that I'm going to sit with and savor and imagine in the days to come. For waters shall break forth in the wilderness, and streams in the desert. The burning sand shall become a pool, and the thirsty ground springs of water. The haunt of jackals shall become a swamp, and the grass shall become reeds and rushes. A highway shall be there, and it shall be called the Holy Way. The unclean shall not travel on it, but it shall be for God's people. No traveler, not even fools, shall go astray. Not even fools can get lost. I like that. I can use that. Our world could use that. Come quickly, Lord Jesus.